Opus Dei Academy of Food. Welcome to the Opus Dei Academy of Food. Today's course study, WAWNETUAKL. Level 2, Base 1 of 4. WAWNETUAKL. What all we need everyone to understand and know. Now when it comes to food, okay, there's an acronym known as FATAM. Familiarity, awareness, time, temperature, oxygen, and moisture. Now, familiarity is all things belonging in closeness, nearness, intimacy, and chumminess. Now, chumminess of, as far as each of us are concerned, is what we acknowledge and what is had. You know you, to say the least. Now, awareness. Consciousness, recognition of perception, cognizant, grasping, an appreciation of understanding, of reason granted to man, male or female, defining self. Time. Time is a travel period, minute, hour, day, week. Temperature. An atmospheric condition, hot, cold, dry, moist. Oxygen facilitates what becomes of the appearance. Moisture, growth of the unseen. So as we discuss each of these, we need to understand that we live in an exterior terrain, and as well as just living in that exterior terrain, we have an inner terrain. Now, food, coming from the outer terrain, the familiarity that's present when we're looking at a protein or something edible from nature. We have birth, which begins a purposed life until that life is surrendered into the nutritional life. And in the course of that whole productivity, from when it is a child to when it is in the geriatric form, the respect of our food is based around our understanding and knowledge of such. The familiarity we have in the exterior terrain of what we gather to eat all has time and temperature variables that while it's in that exterior terrain in both lives, as the purposed animal and then the nutritional surrenderment of that life taken. Same thing with vegetables. They're in the ground, they go from the ground to the harvester to the processing plant, the processing plant to the trucking company, that trucking company takes it to the processing plant for the final product that's going to be offered, or all along the way right to a vegetable stand. All along those ways, we will deal with things for you, not necessarily to see, but to understand what happens in the course of time to get us from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E, eating. Now, inside of that time and temperature, on the outside, are things known as oxygen and moisture. I wrote down H2O for moisture, okay? Both deal. Time frames, temperature frames. Now, everything that's in this terrain comes or receives its nutriments from the earth, okay? Understanding that so that when we deal with how we deal with what we consume and what we manufacture, it must be understood that the animal themselves have the same realm of existence as we do. Their feed, their cleanliness, what comes out of their body, the signs of everything that's important to know, gauge the health, without actually, as Tommy Boy would say, taking a view up to, the buttocks. We don't need to. Our animals eat food, our plants eat food. That's what we're dealing with, food. Not just something that sits on the table at dinner time, but rather how and when it gets there in the condition that we deal with. Ascertaining what they call the wow factor. Now, in our inner terrain, the awareness that we have. Okay? How do I say it? You put a hot pepper in your mouth, you either enjoy it or you don't enjoy it, but you are aware that you've eaten a hot pepper. Okay, that's the simplistic of it all. But to know how you feel after you get done eating particular foods, if you're eating a lot of processed foods or a lot of food from restaurants, you'll know that you see that your body goes through like waves, highs and lows, valleys and heights, just looking for some consistency. Well, we'll deal with the ascertainment of that consistency in varying means, just as long as you know what you're putting into your body and how to deal with what you're putting into your body. This too deals with time, temperature, with factors of oxygen and the moisture. Okay? How we are doing, our health governs both of these. Okay? Our temperature and the time that that food goes through our passaging through our body. Again, you will understand what I'm saying to you when I say to you, hey, have you got regularity? And you will know systematically that your body operates on a time frame based on a 24-hour cycle. Okay? So anything that we put in our inner terrain or comes into our inner terrain departs into the exterior terrain. I eat an apple or I drink a glass of water, I must pass through my system, and whether I defecated or whether I urinated, it is returned. Okay? This, we begin to start to understand why it's more important than the way that we've got it going on today. Okay? Now, everything that comes from our outer terrain, the exterior terrain, into our inner terrain when it comes to food. Okay? Now, from the exterior terrain into the interior terrain, okay, is how we consume. When we process, starting from here, this apple goes into our inner terrain. From the inner terrain comes let me try that again. When we take an apple from the exterior terrain and bring it into our inner terrain, food, when we digest the food or start to metabolize it from the inner terrain, it passes to our system to re-enter into our exterior terrain. The same thing with any animal, or the same thing after a harvest. What do you do with the land? What are we supposed to do? How do I help that land ascertain something known as selenium? Selenium is the key to all life cycles at every level. So all these here, these factors, if we can hone in level to level at each to understand why we would want to purchase this opposed to this, and why we handle it this way and not that way. Okay? And how long do we wait before we consume it? What happens if I don't get to consume it today? What happens tomorrow? And if I don't get to it tomorrow, what happens to the next day? At what point can I no longer freeze it? Or what really happens when we freeze something? Okay, or what point are we adding something to our body that's just not worth eating? Whether it takes away from our illness or grants full-blown illness. Okay, there will be signs that you will know. Okay, now when we consume food and it passes through our inner terrain and departs our bodies, there's an interior environment that we can really fulfill that will help us filtrate a lot of the bad things that exist in our environment. Somebody sneezes, you don't forget to wash your hands, you bring that sneeze into your body. Your body must deal with that foreign agent. Because why did you sneeze? Because your body was trying to rid yourself of something. Okay, now why would that body want that out? Same thing with viruses, bacterium, funguses, but there is a way that our body would regulate these things where they dematerialize and no longer exist. And what passes through our body is no longer what it was, but has become what it is, dematerialized. Our body has a capability of regulating that for us. This is why they're always checking the sewage. What we do with our waste or what we do with the animal's waste could either be pro or anti. Now, When we are orchestrating our food from the soil, and then from the soil, the greens and the animal grazes, or we are the ones that consume that, there are conditions inside the soil and there's conditions inside the plant that are separated. We start viewing genetically modified, we must realize what we know today wasn't what we knew in 1985. What we did find out when we were modifying, even though we were getting 9 more peppers on the plant that used to just produce 7, that the nutritional value of the 7 was equally distributed from the 7 now had to share with the 9th. So legitimately, you have to eat more peppers to get the nutritional impact that we already had. So again, being familiar, being aware of how the food is constructed and how we handle that food into our personal construction of the meals that we're going to make. There will be telltale signs that we use when we use our senses and help us better govern our ability to understand what we're doing to ourselves. Factors of time, factors of temperature, conditions of oxygen, and conditions of moisture all have varying implications leading back to that food. The same thing here. How much oxygen, how much moisture did the plant sustain? And what kind of a time frame? And then what temperature? Very, very important. That's why some are great wine years, some are poor wine years. Sometimes the harvest is great, sometimes the harvest is off kilter. Fruits, same thing. Bad freezes early in the season, but having the frost or the freezing aspect as those plants are budding used to be detrimental. So exterior terrain has many factors to be familiar with. Time factors, temperatures, conditions, and we'll discuss it as we further go along.